The highway ahead shimmered in the early heat, but the sun hadn't even crested properly. That grey hour before full light always messed with depth perception, and I kept having to adjust my eyes to make sure the shadows on the asphalt weren't animals or debris. You do this kind of run long enough, your brain learns to filter out distractions. But today, it wasn't working. I'd been chewing the same mint toothpick since 3, and the taste had turned bitter hours ago. South Texas doesn't usually feel like pressure, unless you've got 30 pounds of product chilling in the back of your trailer, and you're rolling into Laredo with a law enforcement presence that doesn't match the usual rhythm. Normally, I'm calm. I've made this run more times than I can count. Nuevo Laredo to San Antonio. Ice-packed cargo on paperwork that looks clean. Foam crates layered into legal produce shipments. The people who loaded me didn't talk much. They knew better. Gloves on, heads down. My only conversation came from the weight distribution report, and I made damn sure that balance was tight. A shift in that load during a quick turn or bump, and I'd have a real problem, not to mention the value melting away into poison if the refrigeration gave out. But this morning, something wasn't right. I'd noticed it even before I crossed the bridge. The federales had set up a secondary, and their eyes weren't on smugglers. They were looking inward, toward the city, scanning traffic coming from within Mexico. That's backwards. I clocked 2 soldiers with gloves, another with what looked like a thermal scanner. I've seen plenty of crackdowns in my time, but this was different. Twitchy, not tactical, like nobody had briefed them properly, or like they weren't expecting what they were seeing. I had options. Could have turned off the main drag, looped through the east bypass, even doubled back and ditched the truck. But options are luxuries when you owe people who don't take missed deadlines lightly. I wasn't just smuggling cargo. I was repaying a favor that saved my life 2 years ago. You take the job, you finish it, no matter what's buzzing through the wires. That's the rule. Still, I kept one hand close to the Glock tucked in the door panel and my foot hovering over the brake. That little pulse of paranoia? I trust it. It saved my hide more than once. By the time I rolled toward the US checkpoint, the sky had turned the kind of pale blue that doesn't promise much. Just heat and glare. There was only one lane open, no backup lanes, no inspection bay ready, and no overhead lights. That set off more alarms in my head. Border patrol's lazy sometimes, but they're never sloppy. Even at their worst, there's always movement. Agents talking, phones buzzing, paperwork being shuffled around in that tight rhythm of controlled boredom. This wasn't that. One guy stood in the middle of the road, face grey, motionless, like he'd been planted there hours ago. His boots were stained, his belt askew, and he didn't raise his hand to stop me. I eased the truck to a crawl, one hand on the stick, the other resting on the Glock. The guy didn't flinch, didn't wave me through, didn't even seem to blink. Just stood there staring like he was watching a screen only he could see. That's when the second agent stumbled out from behind the booth, his hands clutching his gut like he'd been punched. He pitched forward onto the pavement, and I swear to God, he started convulsing like something inside him was breaking apart. Before I could react, the standing agent dropped to one knee beside him, leaned over, and took a bite out of his partner's neck. No hesitation, no panic, like he was snapping into a routine he didn't remember learning. Blood sprayed up like someone had popped a tire. Most of it hit my windshield. I didn't even think. My foot slammed the gas, and the truck lurched forward, smashing through the flimsy barrier arm and rattling the whole chassis as I cleared the checkpoint without stopping. The trailer jolted behind me, and the refrigerated unit groaned like it was taking offense at the abuse. The tires hit clean asphalt again, and I was doing 70 down I-35 before I caught my breath. Not because I was scared of some cannibal, but because what I'd seen wasn't natural. It wasn't cartel violence. It wasn't an overdose freakout. It was something else. The way the guy moved. Stiff, erratic, not drunk, not high, like his bones didn't fit right anymore. The radio started spitting fragments of emergency broadcasts. I flipped between AM and CB, trying to find a clear feed. I caught pieces, stay inside, then static, citywide containment then nothing. A Spanish station mentioned brotes de violencia súbita, sudden outbreaks of violence. I scanned all my usual trucker channels. Dead air. Even the ones with code words and burner chatter were silent. That scared me more than the blood. When the people who normally talk too much shut up, it means they're either dead or running. I had to make a choice. Keep pushing to the San Antonio safe house or hole up until things cooled down. Problem was, I only had a quarter tank left. These reefer units suck diesel like it's air. If the power goes out back there, the product melts. I've seen what happens when that stuff leaks. Workers who load it without gloves getting seizures, foam turning to slime, the smell making your lungs close up. You don't want to be around when that cargo goes bad. Up ahead, about 15 miles outside Laredo, I spotted movement on the right shoulder. 2 figures, one adult, one small, were running along the edge of the highway, arms flailing. My first instinct was that it was a trap. That's how they bait you. Flash some desperate mother and kid on the side of the road, and when you stop, 4 guys with masks and AKs come out from the brush. I've seen it, lived it. But something felt different. There was no cover nearby, no other vehicles. The woman was shouting something, her voice raw even through the closed windows. She was limping, one shoe missing, her clothes torn at the sleeve like she'd been dragged. The kid, barefoot, small frame, was clutching a stuffed animal half drenched in something I hoped was just mud. Their eyes locked onto mine, not pleading, just frantic. That's what got me. There was no performance, no setup, just raw, unfiltered panic. I hit the brakes harder than I should have. The trailer swayed slightly, but the road was clean enough to keep me from jackknifing. I opened the passenger side door and shouted without thinking. They didn't hesitate. The kid climbed up like he'd done it before, and the woman followed, dragging herself in and slamming the door shut behind her. She didn't thank me, just looked straight ahead, breathing in bursts, arms tight around her boy. The cab smelled like sweat and fear. I floored it again and didn't look back until we were doing 80. In the side mirror, I spotted 3 figures moving in our direction. Not walking, sprinting, no coordination, just flailing limbs and too much speed, like their legs didn't know how to pace their bodies anymore. I'd seen doped-up guys run like that before, but they always crashed hard. These ones didn't look like they'd stop until their bones broke, and maybe not even then. I stayed quiet for the next few miles. Let the road fill the silence. The kid cried softly. The woman wiped her face with a ripped sleeve, still not saying a word. I didn't ask who they were, didn't want to know. If this went bad, knowing names would make it harder to do what I might need to do. But after a while, she spoke. Just one sentence. They bit his face off. I didn't ask who. I already knew the story. Her husband, her brother, somebody who tried to protect them and got turned into meat instead. This was the pattern now. Cities falling fast, rural roads flooding with refugees, checkpoints collapsing under something we didn't understand. The radio called it a flu-like illness with extreme neurological complications. I called it what I saw, a sickness that made people lose everything that made them human. I checked the fuel gauge again. Lower than I liked. I could maybe make it to Cotula, maybe further if I cut the AC and coasted the downhill stretches. But I couldn't risk it. I needed fuel. And more than that, I needed information. I needed to know if the safe house was still operating, if the border was closed, if we'd just witnessed the beginning of something much worse than a drug bust gone wrong. I pulled into a way station turned makeshift stop for truckers. It was empty, eerily so. No vendors, no mechanics, no other rigs idling in line. Just a couple of vending machines and a broken payphone. I killed the engine and told the woman and kid to stay put. I tucked the Glock into the back of my waistband, flipped my shirt over it, and stepped out into the dust. I didn't see anything at first, just silence and the distant buzz of insects. But the air was wrong. It felt charged. I approached the building slowly, eyes scanning for movement. The office was dark. The glass was cracked. There was blood on the door handle, smeared like someone had tried to hold on. And then I heard it, a wet dragging sound from behind the vending machines. I drew the Glock, stepped around the corner, and saw a man slumped against the wall, legs chewed down to the bone, eyes fluttering like a light bulb about to die. He looked at me and reached out, fingers twitching. His mouth opened, but no words came out, just a guttural wheeze and a trail of black saliva. I backed away slowly and returned to the cab without firing a shot. I didn't explain to the woman. I didn't need to. She saw my face, saw the gun was now in my hand instead of tucked away, and she understood. I started the engine, turned back onto the highway, and drove. Fast. No more stops. No more questions. We passed mile marker 42 when the kid finally fell asleep in her lap. She'd wrapped him in a fleece blanket from the back of the cab, his little hands curled against her stomach like he was still trying to hang on to something safe. I kept one eye on the road and one on the mirror, watching the horizon behind us just in case something fast came loping up the asphalt. It was too quiet. No semis, no cars. Just us, the wind, and the low groan of the refrigerated unit keeping the trailer barely under control. The compressor was beginning to sound offbeat, like it was cycling more than it should. I tapped the side of the unit panel with the butt of a flashlight and glanced at the gauge. Still cold, but the strain was growing obvious. That reefer was never meant to work this hard without rest, not in this heat, not with the sun climbing and no cloud cover. I figured I had maybe another 2 hours before it gave up entirely. And then I'd be driving a bomb. That fentanyl back there, if it thawed, it would seep through the foam, settle into the floor, contaminate the entire trailer. A few breaths of that air could knock a man out cold. The kind of exposure I was sitting on wasn't survivable, not without gear I didn't have. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was burning away diesel to keep product stable in a world that might not exist by nightfall. I was sweating through my shirt and my legs ached from staying locked in the same position, but I didn't dare relax. The woman hadn't asked where we were going. She probably didn't care. Not yet. Survival shrinks the horizon. You stop thinking about tomorrow, or a week from now, and start measuring life in exits and fuel stops. I knew that better than most. The cab was heavy with tension, like we were riding in a sealed bottle of hot air and denial. Somewhere around Dilly, I reached over to the glove compartment and yanked out a bag of almonds and a few vacuum-sealed jerky sticks. She took them without a word. She opened the almonds with one hand, feeding a few pieces to the boy without waking him. He chewed in his sleep. I've seen dogs do the same thing. A little farther up, we passed a state trooper cruiser turned halfway into a ditch. Its lights were still pulsing weakly in the morning haze. No movement inside, driver's door ajar. The back window was spiderwebbed with cracks, and there was a stain down the side that didn't look like oil. I slowed, watched for movement. Nothing, not even birds. I gunned it again and left the cruiser behind, its emergency lights blinking into nothing. When the woman finally spoke again, her voice was rough, dried out. They were everywhere in the city, just in the streets. Some of them weren't bleeding. They were just chasing people, biting, tearing. I kept my eyes on the road. I didn't want to hear this. Not really, but I let her keep going. People always talk when the silence starts feeling like a threat. There was a hospital near us. My sister was inside. She was having surgery that morning. When it started, people ran toward the hospital thinking it was safe. That's where it got worse. Someone brought it in. That's where they changed first. That's where they started tearing into the nurses. She didn't get out. No one did. I still didn't say anything. What do you say to something like that? There wasn't a right answer. Her voice cracked at the end. She didn't seem like the kind of person who had time to grieve right now. Grief is for people who feel safe enough to slow down. I respected that. Just outside Pearsall, I finally saw other vehicles. 2 pickups parked sideways across the lanes, both with their doors open and hoods popped like someone had tried to sabotage them in a hurry. A third car, a silver Camry, was burned out and melted to the median barrier. Black smoke stains crawled up the concrete like fingers. I eased the truck to the far right lane, nudged around the debris field, careful not to put the tires on glass. No bodies, no sign of who'd owned those cars. Just clothes on the road, torn and stained. Once we passed, I spotted the shape of someone lying on the embankment. I slowed just enough to get a look. His arms were gone, torn off or taken, head tilted at an unnatural angle. His legs twitched once, maybe a muscle spasm, or maybe something worse. I didn't stop. Whatever he was, I wasn't dragging it into the cab. A little past noon, the air turned heavy with the smell of fuel and rubber. We were near a small truck plaza that had gone dark. The signage still flickered, but only half the lights were working. I didn't want to stop, but the reefer temp was climbing into dangerous territory, and the fuel gauge had finally tapped red. We'd have to risk it. I pulled the rig around to the diesel pumps. No cars, no staff. The place looked abandoned. I left the engine running, pulled the Glock from the door panel again, and told her to stay in the truck with the windows up and the locks down. I checked the entrance to the store first. Glass was cracked, but not shattered. Lights inside were off, but the sun streaming through the windows gave me just enough visibility to spot the outline of the cashier slumped over the counter. I didn't go in. The door had dried blood on the handle, and I'd seen enough to know what that meant. Instead, I moved to the pump controls. The digital screen was dark, but I tapped it, hoping for something. Nothing. Then I remembered. Some of these places still had manual overrides for fleet cards and emergency use. I reached under the side panel where the keypad casing was, pried it open with a key I kept just for these situations. One of the benefits of doing dirty work for high-value clients, they give you tools for when things go sideways. The pump came alive with a wheeze. Diesel began to flow. I filled the tank halfway, just enough to get us to the safe house, without putting too much weight on the rear axle. The compressor in the reefer seemed to catch its breath, and the temp began stabilizing. That gave me a few more hours of cold air, maybe more if I kept the throttle smooth and didn't ride the incline into San Antonio too hard. As I replaced the nozzle and stepped back into the cab, I spotted a figure moving across the far end of the parking lot. At first, I thought it was a man in a maintenance uniform. He was wearing a green vest and moving with purpose. But then I noticed the arms were bent wrong at the elbows, and he was dragging one leg like it wasn't even attached. The face was pale, slack. He locked eyes with me and let out a noise I still don't know how to describe, like a breath forced through a throat packed with glass. He started walking faster, then sprinting. I slammed the door shut and threw the rig into gear. By the time I pulled onto the access road, he was already halfway across the lot. And then two more emerged from behind the dumpsters, their movements just as erratic, their clothes covered in filth and pieces of what looked like denim and hair. They chased the noise, not the truck, but I could feel it now. The air wasn't just wrong, it was turning predatory. The world outside was changing in ways none of us were ready for. The woman finally broke her silence as we re-entered the highway. He had a badge, she said quietly, the one chasing us. His name tag was still there. Officer Ortega. I didn't respond. I couldn't. That's what scared me more than anything else. These weren't just the sick or dying. They were people we used to trust. Neighbors, helpers, now turned into something you didn't want near your doors. The compressor rattled again. The temp was holding for now. The sun was behind us, but not for long. I had about 90 miles to go. I didn't know if the safe house was still standing or if anyone would be there to open the gate when I arrived. But I had a locked trailer full of poison and two people in my cab who didn't deserve to die for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. I finally spoke, not turning my head from the road. I've got a place, I said. A backup, east of the city, remote, hidden. If things ever went bad, I was told to go there. No names, no questions, just coordinates, codes, and protocol. I let the words hang. She didn't respond at first. Her hands were still clutched around the kid, like she was holding on to her last piece of stability. It's not far from where we're heading. If it's still there and still open, it might be the only safe spot left within 100 miles. Her voice came low. We're not looking to stay with you. Just get far enough from the city. If you can drop us somewhere near Route 16, I've got people out there. My cousin has land. Ranch house, water well, generators. It's all fenced in. He's been prepping for years. We'll take our chances. That worked for me. Fewer people meant fewer complications. I didn't have room to keep playing savior, and I didn't want attachments. I told her I'd find a safe spot to pull over once we passed the outskirts, and she nodded, eyes forward again. We both understood the deal. I'd bought them a few more hours. What they did with it after that was their problem. The miles stretched long and flat. Burnt-out cars dotted the shoulders like relics of a war that had only just begun. Most of them looked abandoned in a hurry. Driver side doors flung open, bags spilled, tires blown from riding the rim. I kept the Freightliner centered and steady, scanning every off-ramp and overpass for movement. My jaw had locked up from the tension, but I didn't let off the gas. Not until I felt the truck jolt, lurch to the side, and yaw like something had punched the undercarriage. I slowed hard. The trailer shifted, creaked. The reefer groaned in protest. I brought the rig to the shoulder and threw on the flashers, though no one would see them but the dead. As soon as I stepped out, I knew. Rear tire, passenger side, completely shredded. Sidewall blown out like it had been cut. Rubber strands curled around the rim. Could have been a piece of debris. Or maybe the heat finally cooked it until it gave. Didn't matter. I had spares. Tools. I could fix it. I just needed 20 minutes. I popped the tool compartment, grabbed the jack, and started cranking. The sun was cooking the asphalt by now. Sweat ran down my back in sheets, and the stink of diesel and burnt rubber hung thick in the air. I worked fast, keeping one eye on the horizon, another on the cab. The woman kept the door locked, clutching her boy. I told her to keep the windows up no matter what she saw. It took longer than I wanted. The lug nuts fought me. One was half stripped, and I had to wedge a socket with a bar extension to break it loose. I was halfway through swapping the spare when I heard it. Footsteps. Not one pair. Fast, heavy, no rhythm. I turned just as the first one crested the rise behind the guardrail, barefoot and bleeding from both hands, a streak of dried black down one cheek. His face looked chewed, but he didn't slow. I drew the Glock and dropped him with 2 rounds to the chest. He stumbled, buckled, but didn't stop. I fired again, hit him in the neck. Still no collapse. Last shot to the skull. That did it. He dropped like a sack of meat. Then 2 more came over the rail. One was a woman in scrubs, no shoes, jaw hanging by muscle and nothing else. The other looked like a teenager, half his face missing, but he moved like a linebacker. I shot the teen first, center mass, and he kept charging. I sidestepped, stumbled on the jack handle, and fired again. Click. Empty. I didn't even realize I'd spent the whole mag. I tossed the Glock, reached into the side panel behind the fuel tank, and pulled the machete I kept taped under the fire extinguisher. I'd sharpened it last winter, just in case. I never thought I'd need it outside of the jungle. The woman lunged first. I caught her across the face, took half her cheek with the first swipe. She screamed, if you can call that sound a scream, and fell, but clawed at my ankle even as her scalp flopped sideways. I stomped her hand, pivoted, and brought the blade down again. It sank deep. She stopped moving. The kid, no, the thing that used to be a kid, grabbed me from the side and shoved me into the trailer wall. My shoulder cracked against metal, and the machete clattered to the pavement. He tried to bite, jaw snapping inches from my neck. I headbutted him, felt bone crunch under the impact, and shoved back with everything I had. He stumbled. I dropped, rolled, grabbed the blade, and came up swinging. First hit caught his shoulder. Second went through the neck. That one dropped him. I stood there panting, soaked in sweat, arms trembling from the force of it. My right knee was scraped raw and my hand shook from where I'd slammed it against the trailer trying to stay upright. I looked around, scanned the horizon, nothing else moving, but I didn't feel safe, not even close. I checked the Glock again. Empty. The spare mag was back in the cab. Rookie mistake. I never make that kind of mistake. But the day had scrambled everything. Routine, instincts, habits. I wiped the machete on the seat of the nearest corpse, grabbed what tools I hadn't destroyed in the scuffle, and finished the tire job in silence. When I finally climbed back into the cab, the woman just stared at me. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. She'd heard it all. The kid looked like he'd stopped breathing, curled so tight into her side, he might have folded himself in half. I didn't say anything. I just started the truck and eased back onto the road. The sun was nearly horizontal now. Long shadows cut across the pavement like black cracks. The temp in the reefer had ticked up 3 degrees, but it was still holding below the red zone. That was all that mattered. About 10 miles down the highway, something shifted in my gut. Not the usual crash after adrenaline burns out. This was sharper, hotter, a kind of slow pressure that curled behind the ribs and crept into my spine. My jaw started locking again, this time not from tension. I thought maybe I'd bruised something during the fight, maybe cracked a rib or strained a muscle in the scramble. I flexed my right hand on the wheel and noticed the way my fingers trembled. At first I blamed the heat, then the dehydration, then the stress. But the truth was ticking somewhere in the back of my skull, knocking, asking to be let in. I hadn't come out of that fight clean. Somewhere in the panic, one of them must have scraped me. Not a bite. At least, I didn't remember a bite. But my left forearm was warm beneath the rolled-up sleeve. I didn't want to look at it. The kind of pain itched under the skin, like something coiled and mean trying to wake up. I kept my eyes on the road, refusing to acknowledge it. There wasn't time to spiral. I'd been banged up worse. I wasn't coughing blood. No fever. Just sore. Just tired. I repeated that until I could believe it. I reached under the seat and found a half-full bottle of water I'd forgotten about. Warm but still wet. I drank 3 mouthfuls, splashed some across my face, and wiped my neck with a rag that smelled like engine grease. The woman kept silent, but her eyes followed my hands like she was clocking every motion. She wasn't dumb. She knew something had changed, but she didn't speak. Maybe she didn't want the truth out loud either. As the miles passed, the sky went from orange to bruise-colored. The sun was somewhere behind us, sinking fast. I'd lost track of the time, but I figured it had to be closing in on 7. We were past Divine now, and the road signs looked familiar. I could get to the safe house in 30 minutes. Maybe less if the roads held, but it didn't feel right anymore. The truck was heavier now, the air thicker, like the inside of a sealed metal drum just before it pops from pressure. I pulled the CB handset off the dash, keyed the mic, and tried one of the fallback frequencies I'd memorized long ago. No call signs, just 3 numbers and 2 short bursts. It was a handshake code. If the safe house was live, someone would answer. I waited, listened. Nothing. I tried again. Same code. Still nothing. I didn't try a 3rd time. That's when I knew I wasn't going there. If the fallback shelter had gone dark, it meant 2 things. Either it was overrun, or it was locked down too tight for anyone else to get in. Either way, I wasn't going to gamble with a woman and child in the cab, and a melting crate of cargo behind me. I had to get them out first. After that, I'd figure out what to do. I turned to her at the next stoplight, one of the few that still worked, thanks to solar panels. The city was distant now, far enough that the skyline had faded into orange haze. "Tell me where," I said. "Anywhere you want to get out. I'll take you there. But it has to be now. I've got another stop to make, and I can't take you with me." She nodded, didn't argue, didn't ask questions, just looked down at her boy, still curled up, still asleep, and said, "County Road 673. Turn left at the old grain tower. There's a ranch house 2 miles down. If the gate's closed, I'll knock the post myself." I gave a short nod. "We'll stop for fuel first, then I'll drop you." We found a station still open near the edge of town, one of those old ones with the faded canopy and metal signs that rattled in the wind. It looked abandoned until I saw a flashlight beam cut through the office window. I parked close to the pumps and kept the engine running. I told her to stay inside with the doors locked again. She didn't argue. I stepped out slower this time, not because I was afraid of what was out there, but because my legs didn't want to listen. The ache in my shoulder had spread down into my ribs. The pulse in my neck thumped like I was 2 beers deep on an empty stomach. I pushed it aside and forced myself to move. The man inside the station was maybe mid-50s, flannel shirt, red hat, pistol on his hip. He didn't bother pretending to be friendly, just unlocked the door when I knocked and looked at me like he was deciding whether I was worth the risk. "Cash only," he said. "No bathrooms, no phones." I peeled off enough bills to cover a full tank and held them out. "Diesel, just need 10 minutes. He took the cash without counting it and waved me toward the pumps. I filled up under that humming yellow light while watching the dark horizon. The pistol grip on my hip felt heavier now, even with the empty mag. I'd need to fix that before nightfall. Scavenge another weapon, more rounds. I had backup rounds in the stash, but they weren't within reach. Once the tank was full, I wiped the handle, climbed back into the cab, and told her we were close. Her face didn't show relief, just exhaustion. the kind of wear that sits deep in the bones. The kid was awake now, staring out the window with glassy eyes and a blank expression that didn't belong on someone so small. He didn't say anything. We reached the turnoff and followed the cracked asphalt past a line of twisted oaks. The grain tower came into view like a landmark from a different life. Faded paint, half the slats broken, windmill blades groaning in slow rotation. She guided me past a rusted sign that once read Perales Ranch, then pointed toward a metal gate at the end of a dirt drive. I killed the headlights before we reached it. No need to draw attention if someone was watching. She reached over, squeezed my forearm once. Not a thank you, not a goodbye. Just a gesture that said she understood. I handed her a small flashlight from the glove box and a folding utility blade. Just in case, I said. She took them both, adjusted the boy on her hip, and stepped out. She didn't look back. I watched them disappear into the dark, her silhouette framed by the weak beam of the flashlight and the dying sun behind us. Then I eased the truck back onto the road and headed east. Alone again, like I'd always been before this started. The pain in my side returned, deeper now. I finally rolled up the sleeve to look. There it was, 4 shallow claw marks down my forearm. Not deep, just enough to break the skin. Not a bite, not a full tear, but enough. The tissue around it had turned red and warm, not infected in the traditional sense, but already reacting to something. I pressed a cold pack against it from the reefer's side cooler, wincing as the pressure made it pulse. Still, I didn't panic. It wouldn't help. Panic gets you sloppy, and I needed to be clean if I was going to make it to the fallback drop, recover the supplies, and figure out where to go next. If the infection was in me, I had to find out how fast it worked. I'd seen those people change in under an hour. Others seemed to take longer. Maybe I had time. Maybe I was already dead. The road east was deserted, a 2-lane ribbon cracked with heat and neglect. I kept the truck steady, hands tight on the wheel. The sun had dipped below the horizon entirely now, leaving behind only that sick, dark amber that clings to the edge of night. My vision was starting to smear. Not blur exactly, just smear, like the headlights weren't cutting through the dark anymore but leaking into it. Every few seconds I caught myself blinking too hard. My body felt distant. My hands weren't numb, but they didn't seem attached. I flexed my fingers around the wheel just to make sure I still could. The burning in my arm had spread to the shoulder now. It wasn't sharp, but it had weight, the kind of weight that drags you under slowly, without splash or sound. I cracked the window for air. It didn't help. The breeze was hot, and all it did was stir the sweat into my eyes. The reefer unit behind me kept humming like a bad dream, its compressor pushing harder than ever. I checked the gauges. Temp still safe, fuel low again. How? I must have misjudged or sprung a leak somewhere. Either way, the needle was dipping faster than expected. I shook my head hard, trying to clear it, and nearly veered off the road. The tires hit the gravel shoulder, jarring me upright. I cursed under my breath, corrected, and forced myself to sit straighter. I'd been driving on instinct for the past 30 miles. Not thinking, not planning, just following a set of coordinates buried in my head from a time when this was just another job. I didn't even know if that place still existed. My stomach twisted again, hot this time. A wave of something heavy rolled through my chest and into my head. I leaned forward over the wheel, jaw clenched, blinked again. Harder. The road ahead began to pulse. Dark light, like the world had fallen out of rhythm with itself. I tried to breathe through it, counting backward in my head. 5, 4, 3. Then everything went sideways. There wasn't a sharp moment of impact, no cinematic crash or explosion, just the soft, dull sensation of losing control. My body slumped forward. The wheel twisted. The truck veered. One front tire dropped off the embankment, and the trailer snapped the whole rig to the side like a hooked fish. The right side tires caught a shallow drainage ditch, and the momentum flipped everything. Glass exploded. Steel groaned. The reefer ripped sideways, and I felt myself weightless for a moment, then crushed back into the seatbelt. My head slammed the side window, not hard enough to knock me out cold, but enough to shut out the world for a long moment. The sound of crunching metal echoed like it had nowhere else to go. When I came to, it was night. Silence had taken over everything, except for the soft clicking of the engine trying to die, and the high whine of leaking coolant. I was hanging sideways, the truck on its side, cab partially buried in gravel and fence post. Windshield gone. Both driver's side tires blown or torn off in the rollover. I tried to move, and pain answered in my ribs, then in my shoulder, then finally in my skull. Blood was in my mouth, but I wasn't sure if it was from my nose or somewhere deeper. My left arm felt like it had been lit on fire. I crawled out through the shattered window, dragging myself into the open air with one working leg and whatever strength was left in my right arm. The road was maybe 15 feet away, empty, with no headlights in sight. Behind me, the trailer had split at the seam, the refrigeration unit half buried in a barbed wire fence. Foam crates were scattered across the dirt, some broken open, plastic wraps torn loose like ribbon. The contents were still sealed, for now. I rolled onto my back, stared at the sky. No stars, too many clouds. I couldn't tell if it was from the crash or the fever, but the night was pulsing again. That smear, that bleeding light was back. I sat up and immediately regretted it. Everything spun in slow arcs. I knew the signs. I wasn't going to last long. There's a moment when survival instinct stops being about running or fighting or fixing the next problem and turns into something simpler, a quiet kind of math. What do I need just to keep going for another 10 minutes? Not for the plan, not for the mission, just to keep the eyes open, the hands working. I'd reached that moment. I crawled to one of the crates, split down the middle, plastic wrap torn but not fully ruptured. Inside, layered like high-end cuts of steak, were shrink-wrapped bricks, clear bags filled with white powder. I knew the grade, I knew the danger, and I knew exactly how to measure it without killing myself. Not because I was a user. I wasn't. I'd never let it touch me, not in 15 years. I watched too many friends fade to ash chasing the dragon. But this wasn't about euphoria. This was about function. Staying upright long enough to get out of here. My heart was slowing. My head was fogging. If I passed out again in the open, I'd never wake up. I tore a seal open with shaking fingers, poured a microline onto a clean metal lid from the toolbox, and inhaled it fast. It hit like a hammer. Not pleasure, sharpness, like cold air forced into the lungs. My teeth clenched. My hands stopped shaking. My vision narrowed and steadied. Blood still throbbed in my arm, but the pain retreated into the background. I stayed like that for a long minute, crouched next to the wreckage of a life I wasn't sure I'd get to finish. The drug was cruel but effective. It wouldn't keep me alive long, but it gave me a window. I limped back toward the cab, half dragging a crate, stashing the rest in the ditch, covering them with broken branches and brush. I wasn't going to save everything, but I wasn't going to leave it all either. If I got out of this alive, I'd need leverage, something to barter with, something to justify why I hadn't just laid down and let the fever win. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, then silence again. Maybe I was closer to a town than I realized. Maybe something else had heard the crash. It didn't matter. I needed to get off the road before dawn, and I needed a weapon that didn't rely on luck or ammo. The machete was bent, but still sharp enough to do damage. The smell of leaking diesel drifted through the air as I limped away, machete in one hand, duffel of salvaged gear in the other. The world had gone so quiet it didn't feel real. No birds, no traffic, just the crunch of gravel underfoot and the far-off rattle of an old barbed wire fence blown loose by wind. Somewhere nearby, dogs barked again, short, nervous bursts. Something was making them uneasy. Maybe me, maybe something worse. I kept moving. There was a sign ahead, knocked crooked on its post. Welcome to Rivolo, Texas. Population 2,104. The kind of place you don't notice unless you're born there or stranded outside of it. The streets were dark except for one blinking yellow light dangling from a rusted intersection pole. It cast just enough glow to show what had happened here. Windows shattered. A pickup burned out near the diner. A body face down in front of the gas station, arms out like he'd been crawling before he gave up. I moved slow. My leg was locking up now, stiff from the crash and the fever settling into the joints. My arm throbbed in time with my heartbeat. I hadn't looked at the claw mark since the crash. I didn't need to. The skin around them felt tight, wrong, like it was no longer mine. I found shelter in the post office. The glass door had already been shattered, but the inside was empty. Boxes overturned, mail scattered across the floor, and a broken ceiling fan turning lazily from some draft I couldn't place. I closed the door as best I could, wedged a chair under the knob, and crawled behind the counter. My body wanted to collapse, but I forced myself to eat. 2 protein bars from the truck's stash, still in my pocket, half melted. I chewed through them like a machine, then drank the rest of the warm water. My stomach twisted in protest, but I needed it more than it needed to taste good. For a while, I lay there, breathing, counting the spaces between the aches. I thought about the woman and her boy, wondered if they'd made it through the gate, if someone opened it for them, if the house still had power, if the cousin was real, if they had food. I pictured her holding a rifle over the porch steps while the kid curled up somewhere safe with a flashlight and blankets. It wasn't a lie I told myself to feel better. I needed to believe that not everything fell apart today. I pulled my arm close, finally looked at it. The wounds were angry now, flesh darkened around the edges, vein patterns climbing like roots. It hadn't spread beyond the elbow, but it was coming. I could feel it inside me, like static under the skin, like heat rising in a closed room. I gripped the handle of the machete and held it against the sorest spot, thinking. I thought about cutting it off, but I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I unzipped the duffel and checked what I had left. A burner phone, dead, 1 clean shirt, 1 map, 2 sealed doses of pure-grade fentanyl. I'd taken a third earlier, and it had worn off enough that my muscles were shaking again. I couldn't take more, not without risking a full shutdown, but I kept the last dose anyway. If the moment came where I couldn't walk or fight or breathe, it would be the only mercy I could still give myself. The plan was still the same, get to the fallback point. It wasn't far now, 8, maybe 10 miles by foot. On the map, it was marked as a water treatment facility that had shut down 5 years ago. In reality, it was a buried shelter, emergency stockpiles, medical storage, radios, arms. It was meant to be opened only if the city lost all communications. If I could reach it, and if it was still sealed, there was a chance, small, but real. I could get inside, treat the wound, rest, buy myself time. I made it halfway to the door before collapsing again. My leg gave out and I hit the floor hard. I lay there for maybe 5 minutes, face pressed to the tile, smelling dust and old envelopes and something sour that had soaked into the floor. I didn't cry, I didn't even curse, I just let the pain do what it had to do. Then something strange happened. A sound, not distant, not an animal, not a footstep, a voice. Someone calling out, a man's voice, rough but alert. You in there? I tried to respond, but couldn't push out more than a cough. The door rattled. The man didn't barge in. He waited, cautious, like someone who had survived the last 24 hours the hard way. Not infected? He asked, quieter now, like he didn't want to draw attention. I managed to rasp, not yet. That was enough. He pushed the door open slowly, flashlight sweeping side to side, not in a panic, like someone trained. He wore a dirty sheriff's vest over civilian clothes. No badge, sidearm holstered but unclicked. He crouched beside me, eyes sharp. You look like hell. Truck flipped, got clawed. I'm headed to the fallback site near Greystone Bend. His face shifted at the name. Recognition. He glanced over his shoulder. I've got a working truck with fuel. Was planning to check that place out tomorrow if I made it through the night. I didn't smile. I didn't have the energy. But for the first time all day, something like relief flickered in the pit of my chest. He helped me to my feet. I nearly collapsed again, but he steadied me. I've got saline and a medkit in the cab, he said. Not much, but it might slow whatever's working through you. You're lucky. Most don't talk after an hour. I didn't feel lucky, but I nodded. Every minute was a victory now. Outside, the wind had picked up. The clouds were finally breaking. A few stars peeked through. In the distance, maybe 2 blocks off, I saw the silhouettes of others moving, slow and aimless, the dead still wandering. But we had distance, and we had wheels. The sheriff didn't ask about what I was carrying. He didn't ask what I'd used. He just helped me into the cab and threw the truck into gear. Diesel rattled under the hood, and we rolled down the road like something old and patient, cutting through a dead town with a little bit of noise and a little bit of light. I leaned my head against the window and watched the world slide past. My body still burned, my mind still raced, but under all that, something steadier took hold. I wasn't alone, and I wasn't dead, at least for now.